Okay, and we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel once again. Just to quickly introduce myself, if you are new here, I'm Abdullah Sameer. I'm an ex-Muslim, and although there's other things that I could describe myself as, for the purpose of this channel and the topics being discussed here, religion, atheism, God, belief, this is what I choose to identify as. So that being said, we have a really interesting live chat coming up, and we're joined by special Muslim guest Aziz, and some of you already know Abdullah Gondal. He's been on this channel a few times before, but we've never had Aziz before. So Aziz, could you just introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me, Abdullah. And yeah, I've been following Abdullah for a couple years, and I had doubts too when I was younger. I'm a confident Muslim, but I've noticed, personally, from working at colleges and doing khutbahs around different communities in the West, particularly in the U.S., just notice a lot of gaps, and so we're here right now, and I've studied Islam with different scholars from different backgrounds in America and Saudi Arabia, elsewhere. Alhamdulillah.
Beautiful. And you're currently in America, right?
Yep.
Okay. That's interesting too. That's an interesting point, because I've noticed that there's a very different dynamic between like, not to generalize, but like Muslims that have grown up in the West, like including me. I have a very different like mentality than, say, someone that's like lived in a Muslim country their whole life, especially being an atheist living in a Muslim country. So that's even more different. Abdullah Gondal, can you just introduce yourself quickly?
Hi, I'm Abdullah Gondal. If you already don't know me, I'm a Pakistani ex-Muslim. Used to be an extremely devout Muslim. Again, used to give khutbahs. Have 2 successful conversions under my belt. I converted 2 people to Islam. Currently living in Canada. I take part in online activism. I've been on the Abdullah Sameer's channel a few times, and we've discussed a few different topics. And I'm looking forward to today's discussion with Aziz, because he's an amazing guest. And I think we need to have such conversations between both sides, because it's absolutely necessary that both sides don't isolate each other, as it leads to more animosity between us.
Right.
Absolutely. Abdullah Gondal, just quickly, just like in a couple of sentences, like what made you leave Islam?
The way it started is, the number one is change of perspective. Is especially coming to Canada, I got more exposure to Western criticism of Islam, and the way I started was I tried answering those critics, and that's how I started my research. But over the course of the year, in attempts to find answers to such difficult questions, I myself found or discovered some things that made me question my faith, and eventually I ended up leaving Islam. There's a multitude of reasons, ranging from the Quran's fallibility to Muhammad's own life taken as a good example, or the hadith literature and the content of that. Again, we'll dive deep into it a little later.
Okay.
So I'm back to Aziz.
So yeah, so Aziz, and you were saying that you also went through some doubts, and you managed.
Yeah, man. I grew up same thing, just like I would say like Abdullah Gondal, or maybe like you, of growing up in a Muslim, culturally Muslim household. Obviously parents have faith and are sticking to it, born and dying with it. But when I was in American high schools, the minute I get exposed to, for example, evolution, the minute I get exposed to diverse thoughts, or the idea that someone could even just deny God point blank, etc., it really troubled me. I remember what really made me start questioning, because I was already very familiar with the Quran and the text, hadith, all of the, you could say, hadith, by the way, for those who don't know, Quran is like the scripture, equivalent to maybe like the Bible for Christians, and then hadith is the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Muslims usually use both as a source of Islamic law and text. So anyways, when evolution came about and, you know, other philosophical problems, I remember being in high school and just questioning my whole identity. I guess you're in an age too where, you know, you're a bit confused about your own identity, who you want to be, not only in terms of religion, you know, for those who have grown up in America or Canada or UK or something, you know, you get to choose. Do you want to be with the sports people? Do you want to be with the, you know, the nerds? Do you want to be this or that? So it was in that phase where I seriously doubted my own Islam, questioned the Quran and all that. But it was a I would say probably, you know, multi-month process. I forgot which grade I was in, but over the times I developed appreciation to Islam, but also, and this is something we can discuss later, a level of you have to have a new approach if you want to sort of reconcile between Islam and you could say other philosophies or
Right.
You have to have a very pragmatic approach. If you just blind and just say this is it, and I'm going to defend every tooth and nail hadith that I find, you know, then explain to me, I don't know, you know, 60-foot men and you know all the other stuff that you guys sometimes talk about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So one reason, actually, I think this is an interesting conversation is especially because you've also went through this, you know, situation of doubting, and there's a bunch of people that like they have doubts, but they don't really deal with them. They just live in this position of like cognitive dissonance where they hold something to be true. Let's say, for example, 60-foot men. And what they may do is, in order to make sense of that, either they'll say, okay, I don't know how it happened, it just happened. So what they'll do is they'll, in the epistemology, they're putting the hadith at the top, right? And they're saying it must be true. And they don't look at other possibilities that actually would make more sense. Now, someone like you, on the other hand, you wouldn't just go like that for that approach. You'd be like more like, okay, let me talk to the scholars. And so it's a little bit different, a little bit of a different approach. Now I know you wanted to make a disclaimer that you're not a sheikh, right? And
right, and the disclaimer is 2 point. Number one, hey, there may be, and even when I look at your posts and all that, you know, there's things that, you know, I don't know on the top of my head. I may have to research too and stuff like that. But at the same time, because of that, I have this level of openness of, hey, if you decided to jump out of Islam, or you're Christian, or you're ex-Jew, or you're Hindu, or etc. All right, let's speak. And I think this is the reason, one of the reasons for this event. Let's speak from a level of respect and civility and discuss these points.
absolutely,
I've learned so much, even from, you know, our friendship and our discussion, and in general, I'm talking about outside Islam too, man. when it comes to just, you know, general things, you can learn from everybody if there's a platform where you're allowed to learn, you know.
exactly. And I think it gets a little bit tricky when it gets to certain topics that are very sensitive, very taboo. Certain things are kind of, in some communities, are considered off limits for discussion, right?
It's cool that in America, or I would say the West, let's just use that, right? In the West, you have a melting pot, you know, you have people from, you know, 100 different countries meeting together in New York City, or you got people from different faiths and all that, and you have to interact together, you know, and people in general have the same hopes and goals, you know, to raise a good family and money, etc. And you have to sort of embrace the tolerance. Whereas, unfortunately, with a lot of Muslim countries, and you're seeing this in India too, with Hinduism, a lot of people that are just grew up with one religion, you know, to actually challenge that, even in a respectful manner, is taken as taboo and craziness. And I'm sure you can share some stories, Abdullah, about just your experience of, you know, the hate of just that title or that thought of ex-Muslimness. You know what I mean? So
yeah, myself, like I mean, being from Pakistan, right, and being a Muslim there for about 19 years and praying 5 times a day and being very orthodox, I can tell you for sure that even discussing the idea of fallibility of religion is such a huge taboo in those countries that it could get you labeled as a blasphemer and put your life in jeopardy. And you haven't even haven't even made any real points or said anything that's actually detrimental to your faith at all. And one of the reasons I find interesting is, like, a lot of the Muslims that I interact with, and I mean, yesterday there's one of my friends, very close friends who I've known for a while, and remember when I left Islam, he gave death threats to me, and then about a year after following my post, he just told me that he's left the religion. The point is, like, they're not even given exposure in societies like Pakistan. There's such a monologue society. It's just you, and then there's a monopoly of certain sects like Barelvis and Deobandis. They dominate the majority understanding there. So it doesn't help. It doesn't help people intellectually to be stuck in one certain understanding. People grow their understanding and become more diverse when they include other people's opinions and ideas, and that's, I think, very necessary.
Right.
You see this more with the Muslims in the West, where they're talking, for example, right? A Muslim from Saudi Arabia follows a different version of Islam compared to Hanafis, compared to Shafis, and when they all get together, right, have this beautiful exchange of thoughts and ideas in the West, but in countries like Pakistan, it's just Sunni Islam, and there's just two fringe big factions. So
right.
I find that very interesting, because here you have better discussions.
And and the end point of such open-mindedness doesn't have to be someone leaving Islam, right? If the majority Muslim countries, you know, are open-minded to different thoughts, philosophies, etc., they could actually interact with other people, other faiths, and be more strong in their own faith, you know, in a new light and manner, like you're saying, when you move to Canada, you know?
Yeah.
And that, I wouldn't say all Muslim countries are like that. You know, you go to maybe, you know, Egypt, or you go to Turkey or Morocco, Malaysia, you know, some of them are a lot more open-minded, but especially when it comes to, you know, India, when it comes to Hinduism, Pakistan for Islam, Saudi Arabia for Islam and stuff like that, you have, like you're saying, a monologue, you know, cutthroat type, you know, system, and you may get death threats for even questioning the faith.
Interestingly, what I'm seeing as well, like this was quite surprising to me. I found out that my blog is actually blocked in UAE, like, which is kind of a liberal Muslim country, but apparently AbdullahSameer.com, if you visit on your blog, it says you get a big message that says viewing this page has been restricted, and you can appeal it, whatever. So I created a workaround URL, abdullahsameer.site, S-I-T-E. But it's kind of, to me, it was shocking, because I've never, like, first of all, like, I've mainly dealt with Pakistanis, and I know that in Pakistan, like, I know that they're very sensitive about this, and they've blocked they blocked Abdullah Gondal's profile for some time, then they unblocked him. I don't know why that happened. They blocked
no, he ain't that bad. He ain't that bad.
I don't know what happened. Nothing changed, right? Like, it just, I don't know. I'm glad, but
yeah,
I don't know. And then there was His Sultan. One of my videos actually recently got blocked, which was His Sultan's Urdu video.
Who's His Sultan? Sorry.
Oh, he's a friend of ours. He lives in Australia. He's an ex-Muslim.
Okay.
And yeah, so he was also blocked. I'd say out of the three of us, I don't know if he's on here. If he's on here, he's the most antagonistic, I would say, like, openly. But everybody has their own style, so he sees himself more like a Richard Dawkins kind of like God delusion type of guy.
Right.
Whereas, you know, like you were saying, and I very much agree with this, the goal is not necessarily for everyone to leave Islam. It's for us to have these discussions, for people to decide for themselves. Like there's many forms of Islam which are perfectly fine, and they don't actually cause harm on anyone. And I actually support the right of every Muslim to believe or disbelieve if they want to disbelieve, and to practice a religion, especially which is why I love secularism. And, you know, going back to what Abdullah Gondal said, when you have this like monoculture, when you have this homogeny of like everybody's the same, like you don't even realize that there's other ways of thinking. You don't even, it doesn't even, and that's why, you know, like giving an example from another sheikh, Muhammad al-Sharif, he was actually saying you should travel, because when you travel, you start to see in every culture, you know, certain things that they take for granted, which actually in another culture, they're just like, no, we don't do that. And you're like, wow, like this is so different. It opens your eyes, it opens your minds. And I think the internet is doing that, right? Like internet is doing that to us now.
You're in a global village online, yeah.
Exactly.
I think people in Islam, in the Islamic world, and in the West, this is already there, you know, from universities to the internet, need to understand the benefit of not only going out of your circle, right? But then at the same time, there needs to be an agreement of ground rules, of civility, of discussion. I mean, we can even debate. We could debate right now too, right? But as long as it's not to the point, and I think this is the difference between maybe, for those of you familiar with different atheists, you know, the difference between debating with Christopher Hitchens, where he'd get emotional and angry, versus debating with Sam Harris, right? Who usually tries to keep a calm demeanor and just make everything logic based, right? And if we keep to that sort of Sam Harris type mentality of, hey, both of us are trying to come to the truth. Both of us believe in this version of truth which conflicts with the other one, right? I can't believe in God and believe in no God at the same time. But as long as we have a platform for these ideas, we can actually exchange thoughts and actually further the conversation for both sides. You know, that's something that's not there. And you know what's funny, and I want to mention this, is Islam, or the Muslim world, you know, for the past 14 centuries wasn't always like this. Wasn't always like, you know, right now there's a big situation going on in Pakistan with, I think Gondal could speak on it too, but of Asia Bibi. She was a Christian, and apparently she said maybe one statement, or, you know, just a slip of tongue, from what I understand, against the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and, you know, went out to death threats and her imprisonment for years and all this craziness, and now roads are blocked and people are acting crazy. And, you know, part of it is, you know, the rhetoric of the mass Pakistanis not believing in the government, thinking they're agents of the West. But part of it is just a lack of open-mindedness in especially like a country like Pakistan, where, like Gondal said, there's different groups, Deobandi or Grailwi or other type of groups that just say, you know, it's my truth, it's my way or the highway. If you don't believe what I'm going to do, I'm going to fight you, argue you, you know, block your sites, and that's it. And I think it's important for ex-Muslims, for non-Muslims, for Muslims, anyone that's talking about Islam in general or any other ideology. We could go through the answering Christianity and answering Islam model, right? Where they take 20 points of the Bible and disprove them, answering Christianity does, and then answering Islam will take 20 points of the Quran and disprove them. And they've been going on for years, you know?
Yeah.
But there's a new approach, I think, which is like the, you know, maybe TED.com or the Western University model, which is like, hey, let's have these open conversations in such a way that everyone grows. And it's for the benefit of everyone.
So what I'd like to ask you then, because I've had, now here's an interesting thing. As a Muslim, I was always, I mean, even now, I'm always concerned. I'm always thinking about my moral responsibility in what I'm saying, in what I'm preaching, or what I'm, you know, like anything I'm saying. I always wonder, like, what is the end game? Like, what am I calling for? Like, and I think many ex-Muslims go through this. As soon as they leave Islam, there's a tendency when someone converts to Islam or leaves Islam, they become very extreme and they like go crazy. But like, let's say after they've calmed down, they actually wonder, like many ex-Muslims will say, am I being used to further someone else's agenda? Because ex-Muslims tend to attract a lot of bigotry, a lot of bigots, a lot of right-wing extremists, people, white supremacists, Hindu. Now it's like, yeah.
What, Hindus too? I want to hear this.
Gondal, you wanna speak about that, or should I continue?
Yeah. Well, one thing I noticed is we do tend to, the way we criticize, right, is we're trying to criticize the ideology, and we have to continuously make the subtle distinction that criticizing Islam or as a set of ideas is different and separate from criticizing or inciting hate against Muslims. In fact, I see Muslims as victims of Islam, and I sympathize with them, and I'm doing this, in my opinion, is to open their mind to not be tied down to, like, let's say, a certain sect, like a Deobandi or a Barelvi thinking, or like Orthodox Sunniism, right? Mm-hmm. And the way we need to approach it is more from a side of sympathy and love and care for the Muslims, because if ex-Muslims would be better than us to understand how much harm it can cause to certain people. Like, suppose I was at one point like a hardcore Salafi, right? I understand like what hardcore Salafism or hardcore Deobandi thought could do to somebody. Now, I should approach and criticize those types of Islam, this version of Islam, to help the people. But if I start attacking the people following it, I'm not sympathizing with them. Instead, I'm vilifying them. And this is very important. Is like you need to come from a place of love and care for these people.
And that goes for Muslims too. I think, and that's why I think the title "Stop Hating." It goes for both sides of Muslims too. Instead of being a turtle, trying, it's usually the old 60-year-old plus that are filling the masjids, at least in most places and all that. Instead of having an isolationist type of mentality, or one of that guy's misguided, and just shunning him or hating him or death threats like you may get or all that. It's really about for us. It's really about sympathy of, hey, this person had found things in the tradition or found things that he couldn't resonate with, or maybe had bad experiences with Muslims. Sometimes people don't. It's not even about the text. It's just about, hey, it's just about if people are acting so crazy against Asiya and her Christian beliefs and all that, then I don't want something to do with it. I don't need to read the Quran and all that. And sometimes it's the opposite. People like Martin Lings, who recently passed away. He was a British convert to Islam, a great Sufi master. Abu Bakr is his Muslim name. And, there's people in our circle that just met the dude and his spiritual presence in UK and never met a man like that and became a student and converted, so it goes both ways. But like you said, it has to come from a point of commitment, like Gandhi said, Satyagraha, commitment to finding the truth, right? And in a context of sympathy, love, and civility. And,
Absolutely.
For Muslims that are listening to this, I'm not saying something radical, right? Even when it comes to the idea of ex-Muslim, usually Muslims, unfortunately, will think of, apostasy laws, and we're gonna, we have to kill anyone that comes away from it. But you can find historical examples right after the Prophet ﷺ. You can throw a hadith at me, right? Sayings of the Prophet. But from the time of the Prophet, the Muslim world, when it expanded, this is around, from 630 all the way to, 800s and all that, when the Muslim capital became Baghdad, Iraq. I know right now it's run down, but back then it was like the Harvard of the time, a lot of intellectual discussions. And what's amazing is we have official historical records of atheists arguing with Muslim scholars. We have even Muslims that believe unorthodox beliefs like the earth is eternal, debating and all that. So you had a very, complicated society, but there was so much civility and so much education, and that people actually, with their diverse understandings of religion or no religion, right, whether they were Zoroastrians or Muslims or different versions and followers of different philosophies, had those platforms like we're doing now. I guess YouTube's an open platform that we could access, right, to actually come to terms in these different things. And they were attended by many people,
Nice.
So.
That's an actually an interesting point, because one of the things I face as an ex-Muslim is there's a certain crowd, including ex-Muslims, that want to say Islam is just one specific interpretation, and this is the only interpretation, and the only valid interpretation is basically something closer to what Salafism is. So like a little. By the way, someone was asking. So just whoever joined late, I'm here with Abdullah Gondal and Aziz. He's a Muslim friend of mine for many years. Excuse me. I first. The funny thing is, on Facebook, I actually had messaged him as a Muslim. And this was like so many years ago. We were friends from online. I don't even remember how we met, but somehow we became friends. And a very respectful individual, a student of knowledge, I would say, someone that has studied under Hamza Yusuf and a few other people, and someone that was happy to have a discussion with us. So that's Aziz, and there's also Abdullah Gondal, who most of you know. So whoever's joining late. Back to the topic. So we're jumping around a little bit. So but one of the things I wanted to say is some people want to insist that Islam is just like the worst possible interpretation. And then what they want to do is they want to push this. And if anyone says, for example, like just yesterday, I got blocked by a prominent atheist who has, I don't know, 20,000, 30,000 plus followers. he was calling me a Muslim. He doesn't even know who I am. I've been following him for over a year, and he was trying to say like he was trying to say I'm Muslim because I was saying something about reform. And so here's an interesting thing.
If it wasn't even that. From what I read from your post, it was like, you know, you don't know what you're talking about, blah blah blah, and just hate. He wasn't even ready to read your post or to have a discussion. You know, that's like the Hitchin mentality. You know, screw you. You know, I know everything. You know.
Yeah. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that even in the Muslim world, there were times where atheists. Now I'm curious, were people allowed to publicly leave Islam at that time, or was it something they had to hide? I know you said that there was definitely non-orthodox beliefs. So the Mutaliza, you know, at one point, you know, they were the dominant, you know, belief, and they believed.
Right, Mu'tazilites, the Khawarij, other ideas. From my understanding, I haven't done a lot of research, but there's a lot of modern scholarship, obviously, that have talked about, you know, not only the apostasy laws being outdated for a different time, but also I've read numerous stories and numerous things of people leaving Islam and it not being to the point of all that. And even the hadith, you know, sometimes people quote a narration where right in the companions of the Prophet, most companions would mention, hey, this guy left Islam. I'm not sponsoring this, right? Of course, I believe in Islam passionately, and I believe this is the truth, and we can discuss that, why I believe, etc. But what I'm saying is, you know, there were strict Sahaba that were like, nah, man, Allah and the Prophet injunction this, and that's the way we're going to do it. But there were a handful. The majority were just saying, even in the hadith, you'll see, we're saying, hey, this guy was an ex-Muslim. Or Hassan al-Basri, who's next generation after the companion of the Prophet, actually crying because this one man was a Muslim who used to be a student and ended up becoming a Christian and ended up dying as a Christian. So he started crying, seeing his funeral of, you know, this man, unfortunately, got misguided. You know, none of us are safe because Hassan al-Basri was a very spiritual man, and he was like, you know, you never know till you die where you're going to end up dying. So you see these numerous stories, but it needs to be, I think the main issue is, as a mass Muslim community, right? Sort of like the Asia haters, you know, the ones that are just without any evidence will just assume that this lady is a blasphemer and it needs to be killed and will riot on the streets. They need to be educated. And this is usually true of poorer Muslim countries in, you know, like Pakistan or others, you know, like more stronger countries like Turkey and Malaysia. They have great institutions for even secular knowledge and all that. You won't see those attitudes or people picketing on the fence like you will in a poor country like Pakistan, where, you know, people are jobless and all that. But anyways, I think a lot more research needs to be done. And, you know, even when you look at the Prophet ﷺ, I don't know about a lot of ex-Muslim discussions, but when it came to, in general, non-Muslims, right? Because in Pakistan, you have hate against any non-Muslim too, unfortunately. Yeah. But even there, you know, the Prophet ﷺ, like there's a verse in the Quran actually saying we would disagree with the Trinity, right? We believe Jesus as a prophet and someone that's pure and holy, etc. But the Quran still invites, you know, like this one verse in the third chapter of the Quran, قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمْ. The Arabic, which means, oh, people of the book, oh, Jews and Christians, let's come together and discuss, you know, principles and things that are mutual between both of us, right? So here is one element amongst many others of, hey, let's open dialogue. Or even the Prophet ﷺ, when it came to non-Muslims, right? Before the situation of war, which a lot of people like to focus on, right? He's a warmonger and this and that. There was actually invitation to discuss and to actually debate. And the very enemies that ended up actually giving him death threats later, you know, back then Islam was the minority, right? But those very people were on the platform and saying, hey, if you're trying to do this for money, for women, for anything else, hey, we got you covered. But if you're trying to come for religion, and the Prophet would always come back, hey, I'm doing this for God, and here's my message. You know, I'm not here for anything else, and would come for it. So those platforms were there, but civility needs to be. And the irony is, I'll just end on this point. I don't want to think of. The irony is, when the Prophet was faced with this, right, it was the non-Muslims that were hating and persecuting and everything else. And now, in majority at least I'll speak for Pakistan, right? I don't like to generalize. Just like when people generalize Muslims are terrorists, I'm not going to generalize that all Muslims are, are ready to kill ex-Muslims or are closed-minded. But especially in Pakistan or certain countries, right? Saudi Arabia, maybe you'll have this element of the same jahili, the ignorant non-Muslim mentality. Meaning, Islam was supposed to teach them tolerance and open-mindedness, and those were principles of the faith that, unfortunately, because of, you could say, like in psychology, groupthink, right? When people believe in one thing at once, if anyone comes with even a sensible idea, right? If everyone believed the earth is flat and someone said the earth is round, that person is shunned. It's become that type of mentality, unfortunately, and it has to change. And we actually have great models in the past to actually go for that.
Yeah. Abdullah Gondal, do you want to talk before I jump in?
Yeah, just a subtle point. Like a lot of Muslims, like the whole issue surrounding Bibi and blasphemy and freedom of expression and thought. The whole point is that blasphemy, according to me, is a sunnah of Muhammad. Because if you look at it, didn't Muhammad blaspheme against the gods of the Meccans at the time, right?
Yeah,
and it tolerated him for a while. So if
that's a word game you're playing, right? So one person's blasphemy is another person's belief. Well, that's the point of any.
Well, that's a good point, though.
Right? So I wouldn't say blasphemy is the sunnah of the Prophet as much as part of Islam. The primary phase of Islam, la ilaha illallah. La ilaha means I reject all other gods, illallah, except for the one God. So
at the same time, you can look at another example of Prophet Abraham, right? Like what he did with the statues or the idols of Nimrud. He literally broke them, then gave the stick to the biggest idol and made it almost seem like it was a mockery of their god. But the point I'm trying to make is that Islam itself allows mockery or let's say criticism in this fashion if it can highlight a good point, right? And if
Islam in its ideals, right? The Quran and Sunnah is, hey, this is the truth we believe, and if you believe the truth, if you can convince me your way is truthful, we'll jump to your way because we're trying to find the truth about God. But in practicality, like you're saying, people are just closed-minded. People don't even know about religion, and will just comment. And there's just a lack of critical thinking. And what's ironic is the founder of Pakistan. I think we all could relate. His name was Muhammad Iqbal. He died before the creation of it. But this was a man that studied philosophy in Germany, right? Was colleagues with Einstein and others, and Heisenberg, etc. And actually had I think around at his time had around a dozen philosophical schools in Europe named after him, right? So a very open-minded person. But the frustration he had was that while he was in India at the time, right? There was no Pakistan. While he was there, he just noticed that from the masses, there was just closed-mindedness towards all of it. And he actually, his summary of Islamic history in a general sense, just brushing over, was, the first 6 centuries, from around 600 to 1200, we had a lot of innovation, thought, different sciences were created to support Islam, different philosophies were created. Aristotle's work, people don't know this, a lot of Greek philosophy, including Aristotle, Socrates, etc., that Europe had from the Renaissance came actually from Muslims, right? Mm-hmm. Well, why would Muslims, try to go to Pakistan and see if any madrasa is going to translate Aristotle to Urdu or Hindi, or a Hindu school? Try to see if that's going to happen. Why were they doing that? Because they're so open-minded to say, hey, this man, Aristotle, is agnostic, you could say, right? Believes in the first mover type of God, but he has some useful principles in logic. He has some useful principles in how to organize our thinking and all that. So they were translating, they were open-minded and everything else. And now, Iqbal says after the Mongolian invasion around 1200s, then because Muslims were unfortunately just like Europe, the Mongols took over, the Muslims reacted in such a way where now they were just trying to take piecemeal of their tradition, right? Let's hold on to the Quran and hadith, and let's try to memorize as much as we can, and let's stick to the 4 legal schools of thought. And so the innovative mindset, the idea of ijtihad, the idea of, like principles can evolve. I mean, principles stay the same, but the branches can evolve in Islam. All of that was shut down. And when I studied Islam traditionally, right, that's what we learned. We we learn there's 4 imams, 4 madhabs, 4 legal schools of thought, and after that the door is closed. now you can have small little imams, but they have to follow this way. So it's a very like Abdullah is mentioning, Gondal is mentioning, a very much memorize and follow and rinse and repeat. And if you go to any one of them and start discussing, let's say, evolution or try to argue the epistemology of Islam, how are you going to prove revelation in a philosophical context? They won't be able to do so, because they're not trained and they're not open-minded to actually those discussions. But if you ask them about, a chain of hadith, 10 names of this hadith and all that, some of them may have 10,000, traditions memorized. And I'm not bashing on the traditional Islamic tradition, but I'm saying there is a huge gap between what I would say secular education, right? Philosophy, sociology, especially liberal arts, right? Sociology, etc., and Muslim tradition. And it's beautiful that we're practicing, but we have to come to terms. Otherwise, for me as a Muslim, and last thought, for me as a Muslim, the ex-Muslim phenomenon or the doubting young phenomenon that I had, or just in general, this love for the Western culture at the expense of even my own culture, right, is because our tradition and our culture isn't made relevant enough to critical thinking, modern Western mind. So there's a lack of translation.
I think I I agree with you. And one of the things I've noticed is the same problem is existing with the Quran preservation and also the science of hadith. So when you go into actual academics, what you find is there's a lot of problems with the hadith literature. There's problems with the preservation of the Quran that are being discussed. There's problems with the official Islamic narrative that's being taught to us. Certain topics, like for example, the Battle of Jamal, they're not discussed among Muslims because they would cause doubt, they cause fitna. Like the hadith in general, it's so terrible. The collection of hadith is so many problems. Now let's even go like further. Forget hadith. Gondal, what are some of the strange things you were noticing in some of the like classical Islamic texts?
In terms of hadith, there's just so many inconsistencies amongst.
But even weren't you seeing even like in, for example, in some of the Sirah, in Tabari, in some of you were showing me some examples which were like bizarre.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, even studying Islam traditionally, right? And Gondal, you can add to it, right? But when you read the hadith, right, and there's so many things that aren't made sense, and there's so much time spent on reconciling things that. My essential Islam is based on the Quran, right? Based on this text of the Quran. And the hadith was an attempt to try to record things, right? So for example, there's a million statements I make in the day, but if I just take one little text, let's say I have a whole conversation on, I don't know, the difference between men and women in psychology, right? So something I may study, but I may take one line out of that, let's say if I said women tend to be more emotional or something, right? And if I just take that line, that may be completely, taken out of context. And the hadith is sometimes like that, pieced and parceled towards what people memorize and all that. And I think Muslims need to come to terms. This happened in philosophy with the pragmatic philosophy. A lot of people were debating, some people just spiritual, some people intellectual. But there was a point where it was like, what's useful in this tradition, in this philosophical tradition, and how can we actually come to practical terms? And that type of movement needs to happen in Islam. Because you're not going to get anywhere by debating century-old texts, especially ones that have no personal relevance to our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways,
a lot of these books actually held in great relevance. For example, Ibn Kathir. As a Muslim, when I was reading it, one of the things that kind of disturbed me, or was kind of shocking to me, was every other sentence, almost every page of his book was. May Allah curse the Christians and Jews, how guided they are, or something like that. It was like he would mention something about, for example, Isa, or for example, Maryam, or whatever topics being discussed, and then he'll be like, may God's curse be on the Christians and Jews. And these are the books that are like Ibn Kathir is a foundational exegesis, right? It's a tafsir that that almost every Muslim household, whether you're Salafi, whether you're Sufi, obviously Sunnis, we're talking Sunnis, not Shias, but like they'd love to have that tafsir, and most of them, many people do have that collection of hadith, sorry, that tafsir in the house. And this is just one example. Gondal was reading Tabari, I think it was Tabari, where it had the most ridiculous like assertion.
Narration. Oh man, Tabari. I mean, Tabari, in terms of a personality, in terms of like religiousness and prayers and devoutness, he was great. But once again, everything under the sun. He's that type of like, I won't edit anything. I'll just keep going, and have, you know, I think his volumes of his work are like 100 or something. So someone, you know, one of those polymaths. You know, there's a couple of physicists I follow, but some of them have some of the most, I would say, racist or hateful comments or other stuff too, because whatever's on their mind without a context, they just keep putting. And Tabari is that type of scholar too. Ibn Kathir, I'd comment. I actually enjoy the traditional exegesis of Ibn Kathir, but maybe I haven't really read the curses part, but maybe he means there the people that actually construed the texts. You know, because sometimes, like in Islamic tradition, when it comes to specific individuals that actually, we believe, changed up the Bible and said this is from God, you know, that's someone we do pray against, that, hey, they misguided, you know, millions or billions of people towards the lie of Jesus. So I don't know about Ibn Kathir, but Tabari, you bring that up, and I'm not even going to try to defend it, because here's a scholar that came a couple centuries later, and his mind is just, you know, he has some good stuff, he has some bad stuff in there. I respect him as a man. I'm not going to say he wasn't someone that was well versed, but he didn't even. I don't know if he didn't even think. And then you'll come through this towards many different texts that aren't primary sources. Yeah. When, for me, the real problem doesn't come with exegesis like Tabari. By the way, for those who don't know, the terms we're using, tafsir is the explanation of the Quran, right? So you have the Quran and hadith that Muslims use to factor in our beliefs and law, and then tafsir is sort of explanation. So what does this verse mean and all that? And Tabari was a scholar that came a couple centuries later and tried to expound on different verses, etc. Yeah. So anyways, for me, the reconciliation, last point, is where I have most trouble with, and you know, if it's Quran, I'm going to defend. Bring any Quranic verse and all that, because that's primary, right? Any verse in there, I believe, right? Every verse is from God, whether it be a verse that talks about, you know, apparently slavery still being there, a woman beating, all that other stuff, or allegedly, right? We need to discuss, because that's my primary belief. When it comes to hadith, it's an attempt of human beings. And when it comes to Tabari, now it's an attempt of human beings centuries later too. So I think that context needs to be there. Yeah, go.
So we're missing out on a very, very important question here, is how is Islam meant to be understood? Because what are you arguing for Islam being understood in the modern concept of the modern society and philosophy? But there are many narrations, hadith in the Quran itself, which say that you have to understand it the way Muhammad understood it, and then how the Sahaba understood, the companions, and then the first 3 generations of Muslims. Now,
right. So
how do you reconcile that? Like, and how do you tell which parts of Islam are supposed to be understood in the modern society or modern philosophy light,
right,
and which ones are supposed to be understood in a more orthodox way?
Right.
The Quran itself doesn't give you any standard to judge, okay, hey, I'm going to take the hand cutting part, for example, and not apply it anymore in modern society where it was applied before. But then what standard am I using to say, okay, this was just for that time, but the other stuff is for all time?
And sorry, are you done? I just want to add one thing before Aziz jumps in.
Yeah, I'm done.
And just to add one more thing to what Gondal was saying, if Allah allowed previous books to be changed and to be edited or whatever, what I would ask is, part of the challenge of only preserving the Quran, which again I would, Gondal and Abdullah Gondal made a nice presentation. It was an hour and a half on some of the problems with the claim of the Quran being preserved. In my 3 years as an ex-Muslim, I never really pursued this approach, but this is a very eye-opening, interesting conversation. Some of the things in the Quran, they seem like they're not preserved. But anyways, like assuming the Quran was preserved, but not the Hadith, it begs the question that, like, if you need this kind of like if the Hadith is the reference point for the Quran, like when the Quran says, cut off the hand, how do you do that? Or for example, when the Quran says on Friday, sit down and pray and do this and do that, and then the only reference we have for how to interpret that verse is from the hadith, which is coming 200 years plus later. That's a problem, because what that means is the Quran wasn't preserved in its meaning.
Right. So
go to the far extreme of Quranists, we will say no, we just go by the Quran only, and all of the hadith is hearsay, and we have to throw it out. And when the Quran says, worship on Friday, that means, like I'm going to pray to God on Friday or something like that. Doesn't even have any sort of, there's no Jummah, there's no like 2 adhans or 1 adhan, there's no khutbah, there's no sitting between the khutbah and then standing up again, like none of that stuff that you find in Sunni Islam, which is, so basically Quranists are not Sunni, like follow the Sunni tradition, right? So the question, just to reiterate what Gondal was saying, was like, how do we know, for example, like which ones would be applied today, for example, cutting hands or not cutting hands? And my greater question is, isn't that a greater problem for Islam in general if you say the hadith is problematic and we don't really know which hadith is true and which is not true?
Right. Okay. So first thing, I'll just talk about the Quran and its preservation a little bit. In general, I mean, I won't get into details, but in general, the Quran is an oral tradition, right? So our preservation, even if you bring out different texts, the fact that, and this is something to be tested, right? The fact that I memorized through a certain chain of narration that kept going on, and, you guys both know as ex-Muslims, right? We have this prayer, right? Our prayer isn't like a Christian prayer or Jewish prayer. We actually have to recite the Quran in our prayer. The leader leads the prayer, and in the back, if someone makes a mistake, he's actually corrected, right? And the traditional way was in Ramadan, the specific month where we fast, is where we'll go through the whole Quran. So that will serve as a review for different people. So the oral tradition was preserved in that regard for all these centuries. So that's just on the Quran itself. Now, it's a great question. How do you actually understand the Quran? That's the heart of it. I'm not actually calling towards dropping all of hadith, the sayings of the Prophet, or towards a Quranist view that some of them say that salah, the root word, also means movement. So even if we do our little yoga or we do our little disco dance, but we just remember Allah a little bit, that's our salah completed, and good to go. I'm not calling towards that, right? So the Quran, that's one of the important things. The Quran, the principles are the beliefs, right? The principle is there's one Allah, there are these prophets, these angels, right? The metaphysical reality. We actually believe, just like I can have a truth understood through rationality, I can also have a spiritual truth revealed to me, right? So the eschatology is related to the epistemology. Like there is a source of learning beyond just our 5 senses or our thinking, right? A spiritual way, and that's where the revelation comes through. And so, yeah, the question is really about how do we understand and approach the Quran. The Quran, number one, is intentionally, right, revealed in the context of the Prophet Muhammad's life. I know Abdullah Gondal mentioned something like, do we understand the Quran like the Prophet and the companions and the first 3 generations did? Which is a Salafi argument, right? We're going to follow Islam the way the first 3 generations, the Salaf, right, actually understood it. But the problem with that type of ideology or mindset is the Salafs differed on the non-principal matters, right, the branches. So when it comes to, for example, prayer, right, folding the hands in a certain way, when it comes to drink, when it comes to khamr, wine versus alcohol, right, Hanafis versus Shafi'is or other schools, they'll differ in these different things. The principles don't stay the same. So what I think needs to happen is we need to have a proper approach to the Quran, right? The Quran is, number one, revealed in a prophetic context. I'm not someone that denies Allah or the angel, and this is listed out, right? Allah, the angels, or divine decree, or denies the 5 pillars and all that. Yes, that's someone going out. But when it comes to communal rules, right? People are mentioning Surah Toba, right? When it comes to war, when it comes to legal sanctions about the dhimmi tax, when it comes to cutting off the hand for someone that steals enough money. Now you're coming into a context of this was an Islamic government and Allah is directing it there. And this is a conversation where different scholars have different principles and approaches depending on the the place they're at, the time they're at, and if it's a Muslim majority country.
Yeah, that's a good point. Go ahead, Gondal.
The conversation can then go into moral relativism as well, because the thing is, like, the Quran is taken as the basis of everything.
Yes.
There's a difference between fiqh and conflicting matters, and then there's a difference between established principles, right?
Yeah.
Now, for example, the hudud existing and being revealed by Allah is an established matter in all schools of thought, right?
Yeah.
Certain had punishments. It's like what constitutes the minor details is what these scholars differed about. Now, in the 21st century, if those scholars are brought back, they would still argue to implement the hudud, but they'll just say that it's the minor details we're differing about. But whereas what you're arguing is that, okay, we need a complete reform, and you're also saying that all of classical scholarship, the way they understood the Quran and Hadith and the Sahaba and the companions did, needs to be overhauled in light of another.
No. I'm not saying overhauled. What I'm saying is because we're living in another society, and because we need to go through the classical tradition. For example, I'll give you a simple example. He's not an ex-Muslim. He calls himself a progressive Muslim, right? He's in the West too and all that. But he was sitting in Sheikh Nuh Hamim Keller's, right, The Reliance of the Traveler, another book with a lot of what secular mind will say, a lot of problems, right? Because it's a classical text, right? He's sitting in front of the Sheikh, the one that translated the book, Stand by Azhar, Shafi'i school, legal school of thought. And as he's sitting there, right, there's a whole discussion for hours on slavery, right? Now, even in Muslim countries, right, slavery is a non-conversation. It's not there, or I'll say officially it's not there, etc. And so going through the fiqh of slavery and all that, and for someone that he was a convert, right? He grew up in the West, and he just had so much problems in his heart, in his conscience, of why he sat through, those many hours of that chapter in it. It's just completely irrelevant. But there's no communication between as we would say, between the secular tradition and Islam actually coming with modern laws too and being translated in that sense. So I'm not saying an overhaul of classical scholarship. I'm saying, all right, let's look at the hudud that the Quran establishes, right? And I'm not here to invent a new way. I don't have all the answers towards fiqh specifically, right? But let's look at what the classical scholarship opened up the doors for in ijtihad. In ijtihad is the open door of extracting principles of the Islamic tradition in new circumstances. So as the famous story goes, Imam Shafi'i, one of the founders of the legal school of thought, right? He changed many of his positions while he was in Persia as he was in Egypt. And people asked, what the heck, what are you doing? Are you playing games with us? And he said, no, right? It's a different time and place. So I understand there's different context for which I apply it.
That's the point I'm trying to make, is it's more relativism then. Because you're trying to say that it keeps changing from which society to society you go to, but at the same time you have no objective standard to determine which parts of Islam to forego and which to keep.
So there's a couple of people working on this right now, different principles. So if we want to get into this, fiqh is there, and then there's usul al-fiqh, right? The principles which fiqh is derived by. And many different Western scholars especially are actually trying to devise. The traditional way was 5 to 7 different principles that Islam preserves, and let's extract rulings based on that and reconcile based on that, right?
I agree, but suppose I'll ask you a straightforward question here is, can you tell me, is slavery objectively immoral in your framework?
Is slavery objectively immoral?
Yeah. Is it immoral in Islam? Is slavery objectively immoral in the Islamic moral framework?
Islamically, it's not really addressed as.
So I think what Gondal.
I know what you're trying to say. Yeah.
The challenge is for someone like myself, a Gondal, is you have a whole lot of things in the Quran that seem to be far less relevant. So if you look at the history of humanity in the last 1400 years until now, slavery was important for, I don't know, 100, 200 years, whatever. And now it's forever immoral, and we're never going to do it again. We look down upon slavery. And why do we look down upon slavery? Because I would say that slavery has become unethical because we've progressed morally, and we now say it's, like you still have Muslims to this day will argue that slavery is halal because they can't seem to get out of past the fact that Allah allowed it in the Quran. So how do we, from a perspective of someone that believes this is coming from God,
right?
Challenge is, why would God,
So here's what I'll say, right? And I'm not at that point right now to reinvent our usul al-fiqh, right? Although I know the conversation is going on, right? It's not my specialty or field right now. But what I will say is, when I look at, for example, the Prophet Muhammad having multiple marriages, right, or slavery being permitted or allowed in an Islamic context, right? All of these things were revealed 14 centuries ago, and the Quran, Allah, the way He revealed this text wasn't, principles that, step 1, 2, 3, 4, as much as here is God interacting with His chosen one, as a Muslim we believe, right, in this society and context, and this is how we made him spiritually and socially and politically successful. Like, this is the story and narration, and here are the beliefs at the same point, right? So you have spiritual dialogue of Allah being the light of the heavens and the earth, the consciousness of existence, right? But you also have, like we said, prayers, fasting, different rulings, hudud, punishments. You have all of that there. And so first of all, I think the first step of the Quran is actually stepping into that context. So yes, I don't believe in slavery. I don't think it's healthy for society, especially today, but it was existent in there, and it is also a part of revelation there. And that's the window through which Allah is inviting me to a personal relationship. Not one of, hey, accept slavery and you better maintain it and you better marry 4 women, right? I have the open door, but the principle is still there. The principle is one of justice, right? So that's the way.
The subtle point I'm trying to make here is, you're letting go of slavery not based on Islamic literature in the 21st century. You're letting go of slavery because our morality has progressed, okay? How can you now say that, what do you find in the Quran or hadith that gives you a standard and tells you that, okay, these things are not like set in principle or set in stone, but certain things are. So you can, for example, let the hudud for the zina or the hudud for theft, like, let those ideas go away in the 21st century Islam,
right?
But keep certain things. What do you have that tells you what to keep and what not to keep? Isn't that a subjective endeavor in itself that has no basis in revelation?
I think this is something that every society has to deal with, right? So even America, 1920s, you're prohibiting alcohol, right? And then as you go forward, now alcohol is not only mainstay, right? Before 1920s, a woman having, clothing above her knees was something you could get a ticket for, right? And now, even at the beach, and now you can go wear a bikini or something else, and it's not looking down upon. So the Quran specifically, yeah, I understand what you're saying. The Quran specifically, our basic framework is Quran, Hadith. After that, the fiqh understanding, and then ijtihad. The place that needs to be explored really is how, with this new society, global society we're living in, and you could say new moral values, how do we use the door of ijtihad, which is updating the tradition, to actually come through the text in a new light.
So in essence, it sounds like your ijtihad is another word for subjective and progressive morality in the Islamic context.
Reform, right? That's what ijtihad is.
Yeah, I would say yes. I would say ijtihad is a door by which, if working with classical scholarship, right? If working with the Hanafi, Shafi'i, Hanbali, or Maliki legal schools of thought, it can actually be used as a door to actually update. I'm not saying update the Quran as much as to update the understandings of Islam in a new context, if that makes sense.
Okay.
For example,
why do you say classical scholarship? What is so special about the classical scholarship compared to like modern scholarship? Like your progressive Muslim friend, someone that wants women to lead the prayer, it seems like the Sunni Sunni Muslims are not for like women leading the prayer, for example, or many Muslims would say we should keep the zina punishment, like probably not stoning. I don't know, some sort of punishment.
Right, classical scholarship. So it's good to have terminology, right? Because we have two extremes in the Muslim world, right? On one end, it's sort of like a Salafi understanding of just strict literalism to the text, right? I'm going to wear, if I find a narration of wearing shoes at the religious center, Muslims, we usually take off our shoes. I'm still going to wear shoes. I'm not going to touch my beard, and I'm going to be very strict on it. And that's it. Closed-mindedness. And even Muslims that don't believe the way I do, I believe they're non-Muslims and deserve to be killed, right? So that's like a very ISIS type of mentality. And on the opposite end, though, you have a group of people, right? And some people will accuse me of being too relativistic, right? Or just being. But there's a group of people that, in the name of just their own whims and ideas, will say it's totally okay to be Muslim and to be gay, or for a Muslim woman to lead the prayers of other men behind her and all that. So me, as someone that studied classical Islamic scholarship, I believe there's a middle way, right? A middle way where there is still the tradition, where you're actually well versed in the mindset and ideas that the tradition has explored, right? Because someone may easily say, I'm Muslim and I drink and I party and I smoke and I do all this, and this is what Islam tells me to do, right? And his relativism, right? So if there's no principles that we're going by, especially that are established by the Quran or scholarship, it usually just can get too washed away.
So both slavery, whipping the adulterer, and not drinking alcohol are all equally relevant in the Quran. Now, the Quran doesn't say you have to take slaves, so let's just put that aside for now. But it does allow it. But let's put that aside. So let's look at the two examples. One is it's fun. The funny thing is we're going so much into like fiqh, but the thing is, it's also very interesting, right? Like it's very practical and very interesting. I said we're not going to talk about belief because that's a whole other topic. Why we believe. We kind of touched upon it a little bit. But like talking about fiqh is very, very interesting, and people want to talk about these things because it's so relevant to both, like to Muslims especially, and also to non-Muslims, especially those who are feeling like creeping Sharia or whatever. But like talking about like alcohol being forbidden, is it possible that alcohol could be halal one day? And if not, and I think you will say no. And if not, why not? Like if slavery can become haram, even though it's allowed, then why not alcohol? Couldn't alcohol become halal one day?
Yeah, good question. So first of all, I'm going to say, right, that's my original disclaimer of being a scholar and not being a scholar, right? I think we should have a discussion on these specific points that may conflict with modern society and new morals, right? And you can still be a Muslim believing in, this is for the Muslims that may be listening, you can still be a Muslim that believes in the Quran and Hadith and is a classical Muslim. It's still openly or happily believe in reform when it comes to, let's say, hudud or other things like that. Now, when it comes to alcohol specifically, right? No, I believe there can't be a point where alcohol is permitted, right? Because when it came to slavery, like you said, okay, if it's immoral and all that, well, from the tradition, I can find that it's actually a noble thing to, number one, be just, and number one, to free slaves, right? And it's something that's beautiful. So while I have absolute truths about my beliefs, about Allah being one, about the Quran being so beautiful, and that God has revealed to Muhammad this revelation, right? While with those principles, if alcohol, for example, this would be a situational circumstance. If there's a treatment and only alcohol can solve, or a certain type of wine or something else like that, right? Now, in that circumstance for that person, the classical scholars will say, all right, there's the open door. This is the only thing he can do. Okay, we can permit it for that thing. But to say that Islam will now permit alcohol or will permit us sleeping with women without marriage, etc. No, those are the principles that we're not budging by, right? So
I don't understand what the difference is between the two. I understand the slavery one. You're saying in the context of other general goals of Sharia, to preserve life and livelihood, which again is to me seems like a bit of a contradiction why it was allowed in the first place. But there's a lot of there's a lot of discussion about why slavery may have been allowed at that point.
Right.
I would not agree that Muslim men should be allowed to have sex with their slaves. I think that's a huge injustice, a huge abuse of power between someone that has, you know, ultimate authority over you and a weak woman that has no ability to meaningfully consent. So I would say that's a breach of Sharia principles, if the, you know, Sharia principles are all about justice and all that. But what's the difference between like alcohol being forbidden and like, you know, some of the other things you're mentioning? Why is one so hard? And, you know, so like maybe weed, some people might even say weed is halal, like, or would that also be completely forbidden, even though it's not explicitly mentioned under the general rules of, you know, intoxication or something? Maybe it would be forbidden.
Right. So when it comes to the Abrahamic faiths, or here where we relate to Orthodox Jews, and we relate to Muslims in general in our classical scholarship, there are certain rules that came, and this is only Muhammad saying it, right? This was we believe Jesus actually saying it too. This is actually Abraham, Moses following it too, right? When it comes to, for example, not drinking alcohol, when it comes to, for example, maintaining a prayer or all that. So if you're looking for a framework, we could discuss this in terms of, different types of scholars, modern scholarship, classical scholarship, what they differed on, and that type of stuff. But in general, there are certain type of rulings in Islam, right? And alcohol is one of them, right? Or maintaining the family unit with marriage is another, and all that are cut in stone and are continuing from even the principles that Moses laid down and Jesus followed too, etc. There's other there's other social. So these are sort of personal religious obligations I'm trying to follow, and then there's social context, right? So for example, people will bring out Surah 9, Surah Toba when it comes to war or when it comes to slavery. Now these are in a social context, right? So for example, there's a Quranic verse that says, hey, while you're in war, right, one group can go out and continue their prayer, and another group should continue fighting. And then when they finish the prayer, right, they switch sides. So the people that are praying start fighting, and the other group, right, start praying. Well, now in a modern context, if you see a group of people, in the background praying and all that, that's an easy drone target or easy, target to spray them, right? So it's not relevant for modern warfare. But why was it revealed in the Quran, right? That would be a question, because once again, here the principle that I'm getting is, as a Muslim, that wow, even in war, Allah loved prayer so much. In that hardship, he still maintained the system towards us praying. Prayer is that important that I need to maintain it. Am I going to apply this in modern warfare? If I'm in, the Pakistani army or another army, am I going to start praying in the middle of nowhere and doing all that? Hey, tag team and you defend? No, it's not practical, right? Unless the situation occurs. So the Quran was revealed to Muhammad 1400 years ago, right? So that we may explore the principles of belief, right, and practice, and at the same time, as societal rules adapt, we can also adapt that. So when it comes to personal things like alcohol or girlfriends, etc., there's those principles there. When it comes to I guess social rules, I'm giving a generic thing, right? If you want a modern, more interpretive framework, right? There's I think Hisham Kamali and a few other scholars that at high levels are thinking of new ways to reframe usul al-fiqh, the principles of fiqh towards which we approach Islamic law and Sharia in general.
Okay, so here, just this Quran verse comes to my mind, and it's just been going around circles in my head. Is the Quran tells us that there were people in the past who took their scholars as God, and the scholars made halal what was haram and haram what was halal, and then Allah curses them, and He gives the idea of the Jews modifying, and you're sort of promoting that same idea towards reform.
So here once again, so that's why I say classical scholarship, right? So someone could come and say, hey, you're saying you can make this halal and that halal and all that. No, we're saying through classical scholarship and through that lens. So what is the Quran talking about there? Back there, right, Jews would come, right? A rabbi would be there, and a rich man would come. And this is from our tradition, right? And the rabbi would come, the rich man would come and say, hey man, this prohibiting business on Saturday, I'm losing my millions, man. You gotta open doors here. All right, the rabbi would say, let me sign a check, right? Open the doors. And so what Allah is highlighting there is without any principles, without any classical scholarship, right? They would completely edit what Allah is sanctioning. We're not calling towards just, hey, let me think about what I feel and then go from it. And that's why I say classical scholarship. Hey,
no. I understand that Allah was addressing the scholarship, but here's what you're arguing for too. Like rabbis were their scholars. Here you have Muslim scholars doing the same thing. For example, when I asked you about slavery,
right? Do
you think slavery is categorically, objectively immoral and haram now? If it is, then didn't it used to be halal and now it became haram? And there was no revelation from Allah that deemed it haram now.
Right.
Didn't the scholars play a part in deeming it haram?
Right. I understand what you're saying. And yeah, part of that is just as like we said, as society moves forward and all that, then when it comes to social dynamics, whether it be, I know slavery is a taboo subject, but when it comes to even things like new things, when it comes to genetic modifying of body parts, or when it comes to transplant, when it comes to other things that the tradition may not mention, right? Like weed. I said alcohol, yeah, that's mentioned explicitly in the Quran. Now, when it comes to weed, now you have to actually go through the harms and benefits and then reevaluate. So humans in general continuously evolve. Islam is not ignoring that, right? Muslims in uneducated countries, right, or where there's a lot of lack of literacy, may ignore that. But in general, I think people need to recognize, especially people that hate Islam, right, or all of that, from the right wing, or I'm talking about non-Muslims especially. There's a perspective of all Islam is warmongering, taqiyya, of lying to your face, of stoning, creeping Sharia, like what we're saying. Like there's a whole mindset of that's all Islam is, whereas there's a beautiful tradition of Islamic spirituality, of Islamic ritual practice, and of Islamic fiqh, of Islamic tradition that can be reconciled with, you could say, modern society and can work. You could say a model that can also work in a society that has unfortunately forgotten about God or lost connection with Him. And I'll honestly say, when it comes to full framework and full explanations and all that, I feel just like we need to have discussion between Muslims and non-Muslims, Muslims and ex-Muslims, and all that. Have the dialogue. Muslims need to have discussions on this too. But the first part also is for majority to also know that these conversations are going on and that they need to be supported. A lot of people that are actually having these conversations, and let's say, Oxford or Qatar or Dubai or Turkey or Malaysia, right? These conversations are going on, are actually not put on the forefront. But what will be seen on TV is, Sheikh so-and-so of Saudi Arabia, right? Or of Sheikh so-and-so of Pakistan, right? Calling for, killing of politicians or other people or campaigning on the streets and all that. So I won't say I'm not saying I'm a scholar. I have all the answers, but these conversations are beautifully going on.
So I just want to address something that's being said in the chat. A lot of people thinking that you're somehow different from other Muslims, or you're like some light Muslim or something like that. What you're saying here, is this what is like commonly taught in the mosque in your community? Is this what like many Muslims you're not a reformist Muslim, you're not a progressive Muslim, you're an Orthodox Sunni Muslim, correct?
Right. So okay, that's a good question, right? Oh, I may just be a crazy, but what's actually in the mosque? What's actually in the mosque is kill the infidel. That's what people expect, right? Or what else? He's a warmonger and all that. So, like Abdullah said, there's these sects, specifically Salafism, right, which is Saudi sponsored, right? And there's this other sect which is called Pakistani sponsored, which is Deobandi and all that. And these are usually more of the closed-minded. But when it comes to classical scholarship, right, what I'm representing isn't something new. I mean, when you look at, and you can Google these different names, right, Maliki scholars, when you look at Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayyih, right, a great scholar who's originally from, I believe, West Africa, and lived in Saudi Arabia. Great scholar, respected around the world. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, we mentioned, right, in America, who's a student when it comes. That's the Malikis. You have Shafi'is. You have different scholars that are continuing this conversation, and this isn't a actually, like, for example, in countries like Malaysia and like Egypt and Turkey, this is actually what they're debating by day for the past 30, 40 years, right? So because they actually have very, especially Turkey and Malaysia, have very advanced economies compared to the rest of the Muslim world. And so they actually have to, figure out at what point are we putting we believe in a Muslim government, yes, and we believe in Islam, but how are we implementing it? Do I have all the answers and all the research? No. But if people are fully interested in this, we could have a whole new conversation on this if there's healthy conversation. I haven't really read the comments. I don't know what the response is going on so far.
So
I hope there's not a lot of haters, man.
Go ahead. I've talked.
So I want to take the conversation towards religious tolerance, right? Like, you seem like a tolerant Muslim. You are open to the idea that people should be allowed to speak their mind. People should be allowed to criticize Islam. And vice versa, like Muslims should be allowed to criticize other people too. Now, once you look at the life of Muhammad himself, the precedent he set wasn't really that tolerant. For example, he clearly stated in many Sahih Hadith collections as well that no two religions can coexist in the Arabian Peninsula, and he wants to expel the Jews and Christians, right? Or we have actual examples from the seerah, from his life, that he literally executed people just because they had insulted him. Some were political assassinations. I don't disagree.
No,
with that,
yeah, political traitors or people that actually had power to actually hurt the community. We're talking about traitors here. Yeah.
For example, the two slave girls that were singing songs about Muhammad, when he used to be in Mecca, when he conquered Mecca after the migration, he killed them.
Right. I don't know about that, but the Prophet Muhammad in general had a tolerant disposition. At the same time, you have to look at it from a Muslim perspective, right? Hijaz, especially, right? This was a prediction even in Isaiah 42 of a prophet coming and dispelling the paganism there, right? But when it came to in general, and I know for modern context it's applicable, but back then, right? There was just a dhimmi tax. There was a tax back then, and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, came and actually, besides specifically Makkah, which was a community that Allah gave him as part of the Abrahamic roots, right, was actually someone very tolerant and didn't sanction any killing when he went for Fatih Makkah. The wars originally were defensive. Yes, some of them were offensive, and this was a gang-like mentality. But in general, the Quran and the Hadith are filled with examples of Muhammad actually having dialogue. And ironically, when the peace treaty was signed, the peace treaty of Hudaybiyah that Prophet Muhammad signed was actually criticized by the rest of his companions because they had been abused and discriminated for so long. All they wanted to do was do a umrah, do a religious rite. They didn't want to fight. They didn't want to do all that. But the non-Muslim Meccans at the time, right, wanted them not to enter. So they were ready to fight. The Muslims were ready to fight. Muhammad is so tolerant and also peaceful enough to say, no, we're going to have a peace contract, even though the favors were against us. So if a non-Muslim went to Mecca, I'll just explain this to this and you can continue. If a non-Muslim went to Mecca, he had to be, went to Medina, the Prophet's city, he had to be returned. But if a Muslim made it to Mecca and was captured, he wasn't returned. So anyways, Islam has both dynamics of, yes, the Prophet Muhammad as a ruler, and as, from our perspective, as someone that now has been commissioned to carry out this Islamic movement, right, as a leader. And at the same time, has the principles of tolerance and peace and discussion there too.
So number one thing is, you said that jizya is not supposed to be implemented in this society, correct?
I think in modern societies, for example, and I'm not speaking on behalf of all scholars, but when you look at Egypt or Turkey or Malaysia or these countries that have Islam or Pakistan, right? I think the scholars there have agreed in the Supreme Courts that within the Islamic tradition and classical scholarship, yeah, there's no more need for a jizya.
Aren't there a multitude of Sahih Hadith saying that the jizya will be relevant and be applied only, will be abolished when Jesus comes before the Day of Judgment?
I'm not aware of such hadith. I don't know.
Because I have there are mutawatir narrations on this. Secondly, there's a verse in the Quran that says, "Do not call for peace when you are higher in number or you're in authority." Okay. Now, yes,
where is
the
that
Treaty of
verse?
Hudaybiyah. It's in, I think, Surah Muhammad.
No, that verse, we can't take the verses out of context.
No, obviously, I'm not done speaking.
Okay,
the thing is, like, the contract of Hudaybiyah does represent a peace treaty, but you have to put it in context as to what followed before this and what went after that. Example for I can show you at the opposite end of the spectrum is after Muhammad conquered Mecca, he should have been what we'd expect, being more peaceful. But then the incident of Dhul Khalasa happens, where he sends an army to Yemen, to an unprovoked tribe, just to go destroy their Kaaba, and killed everybody there. And then his writers come back and he praises them for it, and the people had done nothing to Muhammad. And this is another...
yeah, so, okay, about the raids, right? So the way we have to understand this, right, if we're talking about war, right, I think we've talked about these hot topics, right? When it comes to war, you're living in like the Wild West. You're living like in America, like what would be California in the 1800s, right? And so for all these centuries, from the time he's committed to being a prophet, right, further towards the 23 years, every single time, death threats from his own community members, from his own family members, from people that claim to be Muslim but were actually agents, right? And so as part of the consolidation, what you're not mentioning is 2-3 years earlier, the Persian governor, right, which is modern day Iraq, Persian Empire at the time, actually sent his workers from Yemen, right, and actually went with his bodyguards to Muhammad in Medina, walked straight up to them with his assassins, you could say, like the Navy SEALs, to pick up Muhammad and take him back to Yemen so he could be prosecuted, right? So later on, when Prophet Muhammad actually became powerful and these same people, right, are now weaker and all that, he sanctioned that the leader and who was a threat and who was actually enemy of Islam all of these years, right, and the religious center there be destroyed, right? But it wasn't.
No,
it wasn't.
That's not even the religious center we're talking about. You're talking about Iraq, and this is in Yemen.
No, I'm not talking about Iraq. I'm talking about Yemen. I'm talking about Yemen. Two people came with other people, and they actually came, and from the Persian Empire, they told the Yemeni governor and people there to actually take their own assassins and people, go to Medina, pick up Muhammad, and bring him back. That was the same night.
But the Persians weren't pagans that would worship idols in a Kaaba like the Mexicans.
No, they're Zoroastrian. No. They were okay. If we want to talk history, the Persians were Zoroastrians for the most part. The Yemenis were either pagans or they were Christian influence, but they had influence from either Abyssinia or at that time of Persia, meaning Persia actually had one of its colonies in South Saudi Arabia and Yemen at the time. And so that's what was going on. But fortunately enough, that was the same night that the son of the Persian emperor actually killed his father to gain the seat of power. And so that mission was aborted. So Muhammad in general is in a situation where his life is at risk for many decades. And he's now trying to consolidate peace for the community. And sometimes, like in the Wild West, or like America is based on, unfortunately, a lot of ugliness when it comes to, securing. I'm not defending America's expansion, but what I'm saying is, when you're in a Wild West situation like you are in a gang like Southside Chicago, if you don't have your gun loaded and you're walking around without your posse, sometimes you'll be the one eaten alive. So some of those wars were sanctioned in the same way that they were sanctioned for Moses. And this may be different as a image compared to Jesus, who Christians may believe turned the other cheek and all that. But whether it's David, whether it's Solomon, whether it's others, there were prophets that were sanctioned who actually go out for war, and that's part of it. Does that mean that Muslims are all terrorists? No. Does that mean that?
No, of course not. I'm not arguing that Muslims are terrorists.
I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying too. Yeah.
And then another correction I'd like to make is when you look at Islamic history in itself, there's about, at least you can pull 60 plus incidents or battles or raids from Islamic literature itself. Now, when you actually look at the stories, there's only 2 or 3 you can count in one hand the amount of times that Muslims actually fought in self-defense. 95% were offensive.
No, I would say it's more 30. I would say in the first couple of years it was probably around 80%, and then afterwards it was preemptive. So, for example, whether it's Rome, whether it's raiding tribes. So once again, if we've lived in Brooklyn in the streets, if we lived in Southside Chicago and all that, you have to realize once you're getting power, if I'm a drug dealer, and I'm not saying I am, I hope people aren't going to misquote me, right? If I'm a drug dealer and I start making a couple thousands, and Big Diddy over there in Southeast Chicago, right, who makes millions a year, is now noticing I'm getting power. If I don't consolidate power, if I don't have networks, if I don't know what's going on, it'd be that one night, sort of like Tupac's shooting and all that. Okay. It's that one night where I'm at a restaurant where people will shoot me down. So I won't say 95% is offensive as much as, yes, many of them, as Muslims got more in power, were preemptive. I would probably say 60 were preemptive and 30 were there. And yeah, that's part of the Islamic tradition, part of Islamic history, I mean.
Yeah, so I just want to jump in there. A lot of these issues, Aditya Mohan was saying, a lot of these issues would go away if you look at Muhammad as a man of his times, someone that was involved in. So some of the examples you gave, for example, the gangs fighting, and all of, if you don't watch your back, you'll get stabbed yourself. So you have to be preemptive. A lot of these things make a lot of sense. That in that context, it was a tribal situation where dog eat dog world. Either you stab someone or they'll stab you. The challenge is going from that to what we find, which is general principles that that are applied for all time. So part of the problem with Islam, in my opinion, is that it's called, like, a lot of the things in the Quran and Sunnah lead to, I don't want to say lead to terrorism. I'm not saying, but like, they could be interpreted in a very dangerous fashion. Like you were saying, like, you have yourself, and then you have progressive Muslims, then you have yourself, you're in the middle, and you have Salafis who are more literal, and then you have going from Salafism to like ISIS. It's not a very big jump, right? And it's almost there, because you're taking everything black and white literally. But the problem is they're doing this based on the text of the Quran and Sunnah. So in the Quran and Sunnah, it says, fight until there's no more fitna. It says whoever dies as a martyr, he'll get, no questioning, no hisab. He'll go straight into Jannah. And then combined with the fear and the terror of the Day of Judgment, these two things, they combine, and not to mention also,
right, Islam is a very deep context. I think one thing to recommend for any of the viewers, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, is to research more on specifically Muhammad. I know there's a recommended book is Leslie Hazelton. I think she's an atheist.
Oh, yes.
That wrote on Muhammad. I know Tariq Ramadan is stuck in his own thing, but his In the Footsteps of the Prophet is good too. There's a couple of books, but I really recommend people, if they're honest, right, and not just hating that, hey, Islam is just warmongers and crazy people and this and that, to actually at one level look at the personality of Muhammad from balanced perspectives, so that you actually get a context for what Muslims believe and why they're so passionate about a man, right?
Absolutely.
Some people say, hey, he's not that amazing, and stop saying such a thing. But I think it's amazing that around 2 billion people that pray at least Jummahs or whatever are praising God in a way that he taught, and are praying for him too, and all that. I mean, it's a very spiritual tradition with a lot of great principles and all that, and there's a lot of miseducation. And I think that's why the whole point of this conversation is, if we can stop the hate and have dialogues like these, there's going to be harder conversations. Right now, you guys put me on the spot when it comes to some of these things. I don't have all the answers, right?
Sorry.
But we need these conversations, right? The reason I'm here is because we need it. If I'm going to check the chat, I don't know if it's civil or hateful and all that, but if we get a level of civility, then these conversations can actually further everyone. And these are the platforms that we can go forward from.
I just want to give some context to like the life of Muhammad and itself, like, and the tendencies we see from the man is, when he wasn't in power in Mecca, he had a pacifistic approach, right? And we see even incidents like the satanic verses incident that's readily documented. It's found itself in the Quran in Surah 22, verse 53, I believe.
Right, there's different interpretations of it, yeah.
Yeah, most classical scholars accept it, and even Imam Hajar ibn Asqalani literally says there's 2 Sahih chains that have the narrators of Bukhari and Muslim that go back, but it's a Mursal hadith that go back to the companions. But they say that the idea or the incident itself is not far-fetched.
So what's the point? The pacifist versus warmongering?
Yeah, so, no. What I'm trying to say is, eventually, at the end, before Muhammad migrated to Medina, he changes from a more pacifist to a more aggressive approach, where he starts actually threatening the kuffar. And the Sira literature, hadith literature, contain that he said to them, "I will bring upon you death," addressing the Meccans, right? Now, the problem is the shift that happens when he moves to Medina is very, very important, because when he gets to Medina, I don't still understand how a whole city would just embrace somebody like Muhammad and make him his leader. There's 3 tribes of Jews who've been living there for thousands of years.
That's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it. That such a man.
I honestly don't agree that's exactly how it happened, because I mean, this is all coming to us 200 years in the past. But just strictly speaking, within the Islamic literature and how they view it, when he gets to Medina, you see that he's still praying toward Jerusalem, and he initially tries to convince the Jews, right? You see that the Jews then realize that no, he's not gonna. The Jews say he's not a prophet, and they're not gonna accept him. Muhammad then has a shift in his attitude. The Qibla changes from Jerusalem.
No.
Just let me finish.
The Jews.
The Qibla changes from.
Go for it.
No, okay, the Qibla changes from Jerusalem to Mecca, and then you have the shift from how did we go from verses like the people who believe in the Ahl Kitab, if they do good deeds, they'll go to heaven, to then Muhammad saying, don't take the Jews and Christians as allies. And then in the end, the later you progress into his life, you see that he exiled 3 Jewish tribes, and one of the most horrific crimes, if you take that as authentic, like what happened with Banu Qurayza, right? And then Muhammad continuously doing a preemptive, almost like burglar raids on caravans that weren't even Meccan. Okay, they were completely unrelated. He would do those. There's verses like Surah Baqarah 2 verse 216. It says that fighting is made obligatory upon you, even if you don't.
You're taking different things out of context, right? So you're taking it from.
Let me finish my point.
Okay,
let me finish my point. Okay, so. The later you progress into Muhammad's life, he then starts making statements like, "I've been made victorious with terror, and paradise lies in the shade of the sword." And then the Banu Qurayza incident happens. Then he makes statements like he wants to expel the Jews, and then he gets more and more militaristically active. Okay, and here's the thing: the concept of Nasikh Mansukh plays a key role here, because the last of the surahs that were revealed is Surah Tawbah, and the legacy he left behind, like the verses at 929, for example, leave a very dangerous precedent.
It's not a precedent. So let's talk about these different things. I know we're running short on time, but from the Prophet ﷺ, once again, is in a situation where he comes to Medina. He says, "Hey, you Jews have your own courts, you have your own system." The Jews actually owned the banks, you could say at the time, owned the marketplaces, right? Had their own little fortresses with gold and everything else outside the outskirts of the main city of Medina, right? As they see Muhammad getting more and more in power, repeatedly, as the wars of the Quraysh are happening, right, and they're being threatened by their own community, the Jews themselves are partnering with these individuals. They are traitors by all standards, right? And I'm not saying Jews of today's time
assassinating their poets.
No,
anyone who goes against them before even this.
So you have to give the whole context, right? He's being invited to them and then poisoned, right? His own men are being told that, hey, we're going to protect you and we won't open the doors, and later on make contracts to open doors. Even when they're exiled and Muhammad says, I'll let you go free, right? They actually partner with the Quraysh again and make an army Arabia has never seen before of 10,000 to exterminate all Muslims. This is the hate they had for Muhammad because they were so power hungry and they had power, and now they see Muhammad as taking away the power of Medina and the power of Arabia.
This has a whole context that you're ignoring, is Muhammad raiding their caravan constantly.
No, we're not ignoring that, because Muhammad was actually doing business with them. They were allowed to have their business, they're allowed to have their courts, but whenever it was convenient for them, they would take part in society. Whenever it wasn't convenient, right, they would take part isolated or with the enemies.
I'm just gonna interrupt both of you. This is a good conversation, but I think because of time, as we said, we're going to stop soon. I just want to get to 2 more things. One is someone asked, and this question is for you, Aziz. What qualifies someone to be a scholar?
Okay, so there's different levels of scholarship in Islam, and there's different fields, right? So just like I could say I'm a doctor, but then I could be a surgeon, I could be a a dentist, etc., and all that. But usually someone is a scholar when he's a specialist in a certain field, whether that be in the Quran literature and exegesis of it, whether it's the hadith. Someone should be actually formally trained in Arabic, and at one point have an overarching understanding of Islam and its dynamics, and then be a specialist in a certain field. This is usually a training that takes around 6 years to 10 years plus. Some people dedicate their whole lives to it, etc. So I would say it's modern equivalent of a PhD, type when we consider someone as a doctorate of something, etc. All right, let me look at the comments too if there's any practical.
It's interesting that like that's something that's I guess the reason that person was asking that was because you get a lot of this I don't know if I want to call it infighting or disagreement among about like who is an actual scholar. Like, is Tariq Ramadan a scholar? Is Yasir Qadi a scholar? Is Hamza Yusuf a scholar? And even some of the scholars, they themselves will say, I'm not a scholar, I'm a student of knowledge. And maybe they're being humble about it, right?
Right. So like when you look at someone like Yasir Qadi, who has, the 10-year plus under his belt and a PhD from Yale and all that, all right, that's a scholar. When you look at Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, studying 10 years under Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayy, connected to classical scholarship, right? That's there as scholarship. And at the same time, right, some people are disconnected from classical scholarship. They just have PhDs from Harvard and all that, and are ready to just claim scholarship. So that's why the connection to classical scholars and being in that circle, right, is there. There's people that don't even know Arabic and all that, but they're just quick to quote evangelical Christian verses. They have PhDs in Islamic studies or something else, and so they're just trained to bash.
So why would those people not be considered scholars? If you studied Islam in Harvard, let's say you're a non-believer, so like what you would call Orientalists, Muslim community wouldn't accept them as scholars. Is that because, like, why is that?
Well, I assume the question was, how do Muslims consider someone a scholar?
All right, so that question is answered now. So now I'm giving like kind of like a follow-up question as to like academics and like why would someone like I have an Ismaili friend who studies at Harvard and he considers hadith to be completely fabricated, and he's not a scholar, but I mean he could be considered a scholar maybe. Why would he not be considered a scholar by the Muslim community? Like what's special about classical scholarship?
So what's special about classical scholarship is you're still appreciating the text, you're still appreciating the Arabic language that the Quran was revealed in. So in general, Arabic, the Quranic revelation, and the dynamic of the tradition is still something you understand, something you're connected to as you move forward, even in your progressive agendas, right? Mm-hmm. Or I don't know if progressive is the right word, even if you move forward in rethinking some of the branches of Islam.
Awesome. Okay, next question. Islam versus secularism. We had that in the notes. We didn't get to discuss that. Do you want to talk about that? Because this is something I was wondering as well. Islam and oh my God, we're out of time now. But Islam and democracy, Islam and secularism. Many people would say some like subgroups in the community would say that Islam is not compatible with secularism. Now, these would be mainly Islamists, who I know you would disagree with, especially coming from the Sufi community. I know that, Hizb ut-Tahrir and all of these Islamic movements.
Political movements, right?
Yes, exactly. Islamic political movements, because I have Sufi friends and they completely disagree with Islamic political movements.
I think one of the things, and it's not even about Sufism, it's just about how deep are you trying to actually appreciate the tradition. So some people, it depends on people's minds, right? For some people, they don't care about advanced topics in Islam and democracy, whether it's Islam and democracy or Islam and autocracy or oligarchy and all that. They just want food on their table. They're going to pray and they're going to fast. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But it's important, and these conversations are happening, especially in Muslim countries and in Western institutions, I think the biggest point is to actually come to terms, to actually communicate Islam in a philosophically modern context, in a politically modern context, and actually go through it and question our old, outdated assumptions, right? Mm-hmm. This whole model, for example, Hizb ut-Tahrir of just hey, we're gonna have Khalifa, and automatically the world will be free of peace, and we're gonna celebrate, and that's it. And anyone that denies us and supports democracy or votes and all that is crazy, and that's against Islam. You see, so you see the level of superficiality in the arguments, where someone that's actually deep in context. You look at Sayyid Hussein Nasr, right? Someone that studied, history of philosophy and science in Harvard, and then is communicating Islam and its rulings and spirituality and all that from that context. That's someone that's educated. Iqbal, going to Germany, studying, and then having such deep, books and poetry and a message that people were ready to listen. But he's speaking the language, right? And Iqbal had a big thing of we have to explore to the level of which, he mentions different Islamic philosophers when it comes to philosophy and education, and he also mentioned different mindsets when it comes to ijtihad. So that's the main thing about open-mindedness and dialogue and more research. And more Muslims need to get into this. And if we're gonna have hate, I'm looking at the comments. If we're just gonna have hates of, comments of, Islam is this and Islam is that, and that's it. They're just hate, like we're saying. The message is stop hating. But even in such a discourse, you see different hate.
Yeah, and I have to apologize for that. I do have to say that people like yourself and myself and even Abdullah Gondal, I have other good friends, Aditya, Mohan, and others. There's a small group of people where I feel like intelligent enough to talk at the level that we're talking. And then you have what I would call Islam bashers. I hate to use the word Islamophobes. I don't like that word because it kind of, conflates, bigotry and, genuine dislike of a religion. So I don't know if I would say I hate Islam. I severely dislike it, and I think that's my right. Just like you love it, and you can love a religion or you can hate it. I don't think there's anything wrong with hating a system of belief, to hate communism or to love communism. That's just an idea. What is bad is when it converts into bigotry, into not treating other people with not giving people the same potentials in life. For example, not hiring someone because they're Muslim, fear-mongering that, there was this, and unfortunately we didn't get to this topic of free speech, but there was this recent lady that was arrested for saying Muhammad is a pedophile. Sorry, not arrested, she was fined by the European Council for saying Muhammad is a pedophile. Now, because of this kind of reaction of her being fined for saying this, all over now people are kind of protesting this and saying, I have a right to say this, right? Which I think it's I don't agree with this, and I want
to say one point too. Sorry to cut you off, Abdullah. Is that if Muslims, we're in a global village now, right? And Islam is on the hot seat because also political agendas after USSR dissolved. The next interest for the West was the Muslim countries, and now unfortunately a lot of them are in political turmoil because of that. But if we actually want global progress as a multicultural and pluralistic society, then on both ends, right? If someone's gonna curse my mother and I'm just gonna take the other cheek, that's not right either, right? So if people that hate Islam are bashing Islam, then what are you gonna expect Muslims to do except get angry in return, right? But if both sides come to say that, hey, here's the mutual benefits of dialogue and discussion, and let's talk about these hard issues. Abdullah Gondal asked me some hard issues. He's quoting me certain things, but I'm not gonna say that, hey man, I didn't sign up for this. Let me walk away and you guys are tripping and all that. No, let's actually talk. And if I don't know, I don't know. If Abdullah Gondal doesn't know, Abdullah Sameer doesn't know, we don't know. But if there's this hate of, hey, Muhammad's stupid, or God forbid, all these other statements and all, and that's all the conversation going on, we're not making no progress on both ends. Right?
So just to finish my point, so what I was gonna say was I was actually disappointed because I was disappointed that she was fined, and the reason why I'm disappointed, even though I disagree with what she's saying, and I do not believe that Prophet Muhammad was a pedophile, and a lot of people, like a lot of non-Muslims, don't like that I say that, and they think I'm justifying like, you know, like evil actions or something like that. But like my point is that, what I'm trying to say is, the same lady was also fear-mongering against Muslims. So my good friend actually shared with me like a video where she was talking, and she was actually saying, you know, I'm scared that my daughter is going to school and we have these Iraqis and these Syrians that are, you know, going to school with her, these Syrian kids, and I'm scared she's not going to come home one day. And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me?
Yeah.
Like this is what you're calling for?
I
Like,
mean, in America,
and I get the sentiment,
That's
and I
bigot.
get the fear-mongering. I understand where it's coming from. And it's very natural and it's very instinctive that people are thinking, there's chaos over there. I don't want that chaos over here. I don't want that mess. I don't want, you know, ISIS, you know, with the most extreme interpretation of Islam. And you would say it's not even interpretation of Islam, but I would say interpretation of Islam. They don't want that here, of course. And now the question is, like, do we let Muslims come over? So I think it's a very valid conversation. But the problem is, there has to be like a limit where, when you start to kind of make people fear others in the society that you're living in. Now, immigration is a different topic, and like fear-mongering against your like Muslim neighbors is completely off limits in my perspective. And even in Canada, like, you can actually be fined, or I don't know if you can go to jail or not, but like if I'm saying, like, you know, something about a group of people, the Muslim community, and I'm saying these guys, and I start like saying bad things about them, they're gonna, like, you know, kidnap your kids, and I'm giving out pamphlets. There was one guy that was giving out pamphlets, and he actually was, I think he was fined or something for this, because, and I was like scared when I saw that, because I have a blog. My blog is completely against Islam, anti-Islam, let's call it. So,
and it goes both ways, you know. Some people, even there's different Muslim scholars that don't believe in, you know, homosexuality as something that Islam recommends or something. And for the briefest comments, you know, the whole LGBT community went against them and took their positions and all that, or just the hate of, you know, I mentioned Leslie Hazelton's book, but I mentioned Tariq Ramadan too. And, you know, right now he has an accusation and all that. But when you look at it, you know, there's funding from the right wing from there. I actually got in my inbox from the right wing. I got in my mail. I got this DVD. I forgot what it was called, Rebellion or something else, with like a Muslim with a headscarf, like looking like a ninja with a gun and all. It's a DVD. They funded, I think, the whole community, or I don't know how much millions, just so, you know, in masses you have this hate. So people aren't looking for sometimes tolerance or facts. It's become very sectarian, and I hope that we can close these doors, you know.
But I definitely want to insist that, because this is a big problem for ex-Muslims especially, that we're frequently, and you know this, and I know you don't agree with this, but like, we're frequently denied the right to assert ourselves and to state our positions on Islam. We frequently are asked or told, you know, just shut up, just, you know, be quiet about Islam, just live your life. You know, it's as if people feel like, oh, you left Islam, but why are you still hanging on to it? They don't understand that, you know, we believe that it's worthwhile having these conversations, and we believe it's okay to criticize Islam, and we think it's worth our time to criticize Islam. So there's definitely going to be, if you look at a scale, it's always going to be weighed on the side of believers, because believers are promised some unlimited, you know, reward. Like, you know, for you to have this conversation, it's a sacrifice. And you would hope, you know, believing in God, that God would actually reward you and be pleased with you for what you're doing. Whereas an atheist, we don't have any sort of like benefit we get other than worldly benefits, right? There's only worldly benefits to discussing Islam. So the challenge is that, you know, I have to say that, you know, we have to emphasize that people do have the right to say, I think, to say bad things. Now, we may not agree with these bad things. We may think it's offensive, it's disgusting. Like you were saying, when somebody insults your mother, you're going to be angry, right? So Muhammad is you know, held in such high esteem that even, you know, the hadith says, you love me, you should love me more than your mother, your father, and even your own self. So Muhammad mandated, you know, that you must love him to such a level that, you know, you can't, it's very difficult for us to criticize him, because Muslims get very angry, and it's okay to be upset. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to, but what's not okay is to, you know, to be violent, to bully someone, to try to shut them down, to like, you know, get the page blocked, to report them because, you know, cyber bully them, to take away the right to freedom of expression simply because you disagree with them. Unless, and of course, it gets to the point of like calling for bigotry and hate. Now that's a challenging kind of line to draw, and it's always going to be like arguments on both sides. But yeah, that's basically what I have to say. So is there anything else you'd like to add? Because I know we're getting close to, we're almost at 11. So let's finish up in the next 10 minutes. Anything you want to add, Aziz? And then Abdullah Gondal after that, I guess.
Or Gondal can go first, and if there's any questions too, that's fine too.
I agree with what Sameer said, that Muslims are a minority and ex-Muslims are a minority.
So Abdullah Gondal is, I can't, oh, you know what? Hold on. Let me see. Did I mute you by mistake? Hold on.
Hello?
Can you say something, Abdullah? Oh, wait. Hello? Okay, there, I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So Muslims are a minority and ex-Muslims are a minority within a minority, right? Now, we have to understand that, like, I agree with you when you're saying you cannot incite violence or hatred towards people. And I know that these conversations are hard and very, very sensitive, yet they are crucial and they need to be had. Because, like, ex-Muslims like me, like, I can't go to my country. My own aunties want to kill me and my baby. And it happens to a lot of ex-Muslims where their family ostracizes them. And this is a huge issue. At the same time, bigotry against Muslims is also a huge issue that needs to be dealt with. So we have to have a lot of nuance in this discussion, and both sides are going to be offended, and both sides are going to take jabs at each other. But we got to remain civil and have these conversations. The point on free speech, like you said, like I don't agree Muhammad was a pedophile. In fact, I don't even criticize him for the Aisha thing at all, unless Muslims bring him up as the best example for all times to come. The question I want to ask Aziz here is, firstly, in an Islamic state, if one exists, what are the nuances surrounding freedom of speech? Can an ex-Muslim be vocal and criticize Muhammad's ideas, personalities, and be safe in that society? He keeps quoting Iqbal, saying that he's a great philosopher and stuff, but and he's one of the founders of Pakistan, which was a country founded upon Islam. Now, does that entail that he believed in the idea of a Muslim caliphate? I don't know to what extent. So, Aziz, what are the nuances associated with freedom of speech and liberties in a Muslim society? Can I be vocal with my criticisms, or should I respect the sentiments of the people? As you said, like if somebody abuses your mother, people will get angry and you should expect a reaction from them.
Right. So obviously Pakistan is a very charged country itself. For politics itself, I think Sherman Jackson has a really good book on, Dr. Sherman Jackson has a good book on Islam and politics for those who want to go deeper. But in general, you know, freedom of speech, the way it's practiced in most countries, you know, you have to have a level of platforms and dialogue. I don't know how modern countries like perhaps Turkey or Malaysia would be open to it. You know, in Pakistan, especially Bangladesh, all that, you know, that type of criticism, you have fear of your life, like you said. But in many other countries, you know, there's people even within Turkey and other places that, you know, converted out or are for the most part, a lot of them are just very progressive, you know, just very much we love the spirituality and or the religion, but not any of this politics stuff or any of the other stuff. So I agree with you. Free speech is something that the West has a lot of, and Muslim world needs to have more of. And at the same time, it's a hard battle, but it's only going to happen if platforms like these, if enough group of people come and the conversation happens, right, at the same level, then we can move forward. And I think that's my final point too, is you know, for the longest, when it came to, like, for example, democracy versus communism, you know, it was just hate, demonizing the other side, Russians versus Americans, all that. But only when it came to a point where, you know, late 1980s and all that, where we started conversing more and more, did you know, one system eventually did people come to dialogue, and now you're part of a society like that. So in the same way, you know, instead of the idea of Islam versus the West and clash of civilizations, if Muslims get with the program in the open dialogue, and also the West, you know, it's not a colonial, it's not a hateful or that type of thing, and we can actually create these platforms, right? We're doing it in a small way here, but even I wish universities would have dialogue, right, with different universities and people, the young generation in general, right? The new people that are growing up on social media, on YouTube, everything else, they're already more open-minded. So I feel like we're a part of a microcosm of a good effort, and only through this can we learn to appreciate Islam. Can Muslims learn to appreciate Islam and explain it to others? And for those who are struggling in their practice or understanding of Islam, can they actually be deeply rooted in understanding it? And some people from these conversations may end up questioning or leaving it, and that's part of the journey for people to try to seek the truth, and eventually the hope is everyone comes back to the truth, which is Islam. Wink, wink. All right, that's my final point. I know we've taken a while. Thank you guys for hosting me, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. As you know, it's quite difficult to actually get Muslim guests to come and talk, and I apologize if you felt tag teamed in any way by me and Gondal. I'd love to have, you know, more conversations like this. If any Muslims or theists in general would love to have a conversation, I mean, we have a lot of conversations among ex-Muslims and atheists already, so this is much more interesting, and this is much more useful. Mo is asking for his Twitter or website. He prefers not to share.
Well, yeah, we'll look at it later.
Yeah, so we're not gonna share any personal details for Aziz right now. He prefers to remain a little bit. He's a humble guy, and he prefers not to be in the spotlight. So we're not gonna share any contact details. But anyways, if anyone else wants to come, Abdullah Gondal, thank you so much as well for offering to join, and you've added a lot of value to the conversation. A lot of points I didn't even think about, and I guess that's the benefit of having, you know, these type of discussions. Aziz as well, thank you so much, as you know how difficult it is, and I so appreciate you taking the time to do this. Again, if anybody knows someone would like to have these conversations, you don't have to have a huge platform, but I will do some filtering on who I speak with. I definitely want to know that who I'm inviting on the channel is going to be, you know, a good person to talk to, is going to have some respect, and all that. And as you can see, Aziz was amazing. He took questions from two atheists at the same time, and he was like, boom, boom, boom. Like, you know, he had like, I really appreciate, you know, all of the knowledge and wisdom that you have. And I really, like, one of my goals for this channel is to let people see that Muslims are not a monolith. There's very many different type of Muslims, and Aziz is not like an oddball Muslim. Many of my Muslim friends, especially in the more Sufi community, classical Islam, Orthodox Islam, or whatever you want to call it, they don't believe that, you know, like, apostates necessarily need to be killed, or that blasphemy law needs to be implemented. They're okay with having these dialogues, as you can see. They're very happy to discuss whether Islam is true or not. Like he was saying, like the golden age of Islam, where, you know, debates were happening between people that are now, a lot of them would be considered non-Muslims, like for example Mutaliza, they'd be considered like heretics, right, or disbelievers even, right? So we've unfortunately, much of the Muslim world is very intolerant right now, but, you know, things like this will change it, I think. And from my perspective, I want people to see that, like, Muslims are also, you know, like, honest, good, kind, normal people that also want to just live their lives, just like ex-Muslims do. Majority of us, we don't really care, right? And majority of Muslims don't really care about Sharia or whatever. They just want to live their lives. They just want to have, you know, they want to live their lives. A lot of them, they just go to the mosque on Friday. They don't want anyone to die. They don't want Asia Bibi to be hanged or anything like that. they're just like typical like people, like normal people, and a lot of them don't even know what's in their own traditions, the good things and the bad things, right? Abdullah Gondal, you want to add anything else? People can find you, I guess, on Facebook. Anywhere else to find you, Gondal? Is that it for now, I guess?
For now, I think it's just Facebook, and I periodically appear in videos on your channel or Harris Sultan's channel.
Okay, do you want to add anything else? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love the conversation, and I think what this does is the more you talk, the more understanding develops on both sides, which leads to more tolerance and breaks down barriers, you know, less animosity. And I think this is, in essence, necessary at this in this age and time, because we have Muslims that are being discriminated against, and then there's ex-Muslims that are discriminated against, and then there's the right that's taking cherry picking and enabling more and more bigots. So we need to establish or emphasize that, listen, most Muslims are better than, let's say, Islam itself, in my opinion. Most Muslims are very nice people. Like, my family is still Muslim, my parents, and I don't hate them. They're really nice people, you know? A lot of Muslims, if you see, like, in Canada, for example, they're very, very educated. They all go to university. In fact, the largest student group where I studied was the Muslim Student Association by a mile. And they were one of the leading, most active groups. And they were amongst the most tolerant ones too. And that's what I want to come back to, is you can criticize Islam, but you have to specify that you're criticizing, suppose, the Salafi or the Orthodox Sunni version of Islam. You can't group, for example, Sunnis and ISIS in the same category. That is beyond absurd. Okay, so these nuances are very, very relevant. I mean, it's like, I loved Aziz being here. I'm sorry if like we asked a little too hard questions, but
it's all good.
Like, again, I enjoyed the conversation, and
yeah,
it was in a very respectful, civil way.
Yeah,
and that's what's important. Like, the point is, like, most Muslims are progressive and open-minded individuals like Aziz, especially the ones living in the West. Okay? Even in the East, like in countries like Malaysia, Turkey, Indonesia, the more education, the more people become enlightened, and the more conversations we have like this, the more they will enable and empower liberal and progressive thought amongst the Muslim world.
Right.
Again, last message I'd say is, I want the Muslims themselves to read their texts, because I see that a lot of the youth especially are oblivious to what the texts say, the good and bad. And we have to also acknowledge that the Quran and the Hadith also have a lot of good in them. For example, in Surah 41, where it's, I think, verse 34, where it says that if you have an enemy, remove good with evil with good, and you'll see that your enemy will become like your close friend, or like, be nice to your parents. There's a lot of good in Islam too. Like, for example, like the zakat, right? Like, it's a very good welfare system that Muhammad established. Obviously, it's not exclusive to Islam, but there's a lot of benefit. So I'd say, take the good, leave the bad. You have to understand that there are certain principles of live and let live, religious freedom.
Right, and then move forward from there.
Yeah, exactly, and build more bridges.
Yeah, I agree, man. Thank you both for having me, and thank you all for watching, especially the respectful ones.
Okay, everyone, all the best. Bye-bye.